couldn't hear you. I went through all of the technical checks and then realized I'd turned the volume on my headphones down.
All right, we can get started in a couple of minutes. Oh, I like the way the screen slowly gets back in sync. Thank you, Braun. Braun is taking notes. I assume you're going to do it in the Hedge doc. People can look. Great. When you get a chance, just post the link where you're working there in the chat. Okay, we'll start. I'll do the overhead. Darryl will steer the content. Welcome to the first session of the last day of yet another virtual IETF. Thank you all for coming. I see we have a little more than a couple dozen people here. So let us get started. By now, many of you will have seen, I'll wait for the screen to catch up. Wow, slow. Oh, I'm Alexi says, don't use the Acme link. That's what's in the slides. Yeah, that's okay. I took notes for the RFC editor and I added an extra letter. So we were also bifurcated across two Hedge docs. All right. Is the screen fully correct for anybody? Like, seem to know well?
No.
No. All right. Well,
I think it works a lot better if you use the slide share instead of sharing your desktop.
Probably. Never having done that, being old school and all, right? That's why you see the T-Rex. Luckily, there's not much. All right, how do I use the slide share? Go to the share preloaded slides.
So the join queue button?
Yeah. All right, stop sharing, share slides. Great, okay. That was easy. Thank you, Meet Echo. Great, okay. So, off to a slightly slow start. Yes, much better. Thank you, Martin. All right, this is the note well. Many of you IETF folks will have seen this a dozen times so far. Pardon me. It's a reminder of the policies and practices for intellectual property, contributing at the IETF. A contribution is speaking up, saying something, writing on the mail list. Personal information, we have a policy, privacy policy that we take very strongly and try to, follow. Second page of the note well, pardon my throat, is links to the documents. As Francesca pointed in the slides that you can find, as Francesca pointed in the chat, you can find the slides online there, which would make the links active. Apparently next time around, MeetEcho will make links actually work for screen sharing, which to me sounds pretty magical. One thing to know is the BCP things. If you haven't seen them, they are indirect references to RFCs. BCP 9 in particular means, oh, these following 8 RFCs. Maybe that'll get updated at some point, but anyhow, the current note well. The note really well, pardon me. This session, the IESG, the technical leadership of the IETF, has really asked working chairs to emphasize more of the soft skills of being involved in the IETF. So treat colleagues with respect, speak slowly, limit the use of slang. It tends to be hard to follow if you speak too quickly or you use words that are, not well understood. If you have a disagreement about ideas, use judgment. Don't just say, oh, that idea is stupid and how could you have thought of it? The goal is to use your best engineering judgment and find a solution that works, pardon me, for the whole internet. Certainly having things deployed shows proof of concept, at least, but it may not be applicable to everyone. And the goal here is really to get everyone to contribute to the ongoing work of this working group, of all the working groups, and the IETF as a whole. Please keep these things in mind in mic, in messaging, in chat rooms. That doesn't mean you have to be, boring engineers with no sense of humor, but try not to make it personal. Okay. Online meeting tips. Rich should read point 0. Rich should refresh himself. Make sure the video is off unless you're chairing or presenting. That means, Daryl, you can turn your video back on. Please mute your mic unless you're speaking. And the controls for all of that, sure most of you are aware by now, are in the upper left-hand corner, just above the chat dialog on the left-hand side. You're encouraged to use headset, earbuds, and so on. It tends to be better sound quality. The blue sheets, or the blue shees, whatever they are automatically generated by MeetEcho. When you sign into the video conference, you had to sign in with your IETF login, your data tracker login. Blue sheets are used to record who attended. Those are used for planning capacity for future online meetings, future in real life meetings, should we ever be able to go back to that, hopefully. They are also have been used periodically when people sue the IETF about patents. Oh, so-and-so was here and he never said anything. Well, here's the list that shows they were there. But think of it mainly as capacity planning for the future. Chat rooms in MeetEcho, the bar on the left, are connected to the Jabber chat rooms that are listed in the data tracker agenda. So if you go to dt.ietf.org/WG for working group /HTTPAPI, you can see the chat room. There is a MeetEcho guide. It's from the previous IETF session. Obviously, it's a little late to be showing all this stuff now, but we're asked to. Agenda. First part is administrative. Oh yeah, Acme. The note well, that's the few pages that we just covered. Minute taker Gwanda has offered to take minutes. He'll be doing it at notes.ietf.org, notes IETF112 HTTP API, not ACME. Obviously, I was jet lagged in anticipation of doing these slides. Agenda bashing in a sec, so look at the other bullets. So first we have an intro, a note well about a query method that's happening in HTTP BIS, discussion of link templates, other document updates, and then any other business. Does anyone else have things they would like to add or shuffle around in the agenda? Okay. Bang the gavel, so it's noted. Query method. Mark, you want to talk?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. So this is just a heads up about a draft that is in the HTTP working group. It's for a new HTTP method. Originally, we were reusing the search method, which was an old WebDav method, but the most recent version of the draft changes that for query. We felt that had a little bit better ergonomics, and it was more clear that it wasn't just for WebDav. And so we're trying that out to see how that goes and see if people like it. And so this is a new HTTP method that has similar semantics to GET in that it's safe and idempotent and cacheable. But it allows you to put a request body on the GET, which HTTP either doesn't allow or extremely strongly discourages. And we know that some people out there are using gets with bodies because they want certain attributes. They don't want to put some data in the URL, or it might be that the URL, the data they want to send is really long, and they're not sure that it's going to be URLs that long are going to be handled. And of course, if you want to put some kinds of data in a URL, it has to be encoded. And so for various reasons, people want to do this, but they still want it to be, for example, cacheable. They want those get semantics. And so this method is designed to kind of fit that niche, to allow a safe and idempotent and cacheable request, potentially cacheable request, to be expressed with a body. And so the most recent version, we introduced caching semantics for it, to some guidelines of how a cache should treat it. We changed from search to query, as I mentioned. And I'm talking about it here because probably the biggest use case for this method is folks using HTTP APIs. I know that I think Elasticsearch uses get with bodies in this fashion, and a few other folks do too. So if you know of APIs or you have APIs that need these semantics, we'd really be keen to have your feedback over in the HTTP working group, because we'd like to make sure that we're on the right track with it. Any questions? Okay. Maybe we should move on.
Comment, give some initial feedback right now. Mark can take back.
So Daryl said he prefers query over search, which fair enough. And Eric says, looks very useful. Phil is absorbing the query.
There are definitely lots of APIs that I work with that could use this in the form as it's described.
Cool. Phil?
Hi, Mark. Yes, sorry, I've just seen this. So I'm just as I say, absorbing what you just said. There's nothing here. I hope, and knowing you, I'm sure it's true. There's nothing here that defines the format of that query. It's just I'm sending you a query. Here's some stuff that I'm hoping you understand.
Right, and this actually falls into a similar pattern that we had with patch. We defined the patch method, but we didn't define any patch formats. Right. And so that was unfortunate, especially for patch. People needed application-specific patch formats. We eventually came up with JSON patch, and a few others came down the pike, JSON merge patch, and maybe one or two others. But the question is whether we need a common query format for this method. I tend to think that that's probably out of scope for the HTTP working group, just because a whole new query language is, it's a pretty big undertaking, and it has a lot of application semantics kind of in it. There are different kinds of constraints you might want to make. We're just giving you a method to do that in. But it's a good question, and certainly if somebody comes up with a draft for a standard and really interesting query format, that's something I hope the IETF would consider taking on.
Yeah, it was really the fact that in a query string you have name value pairs. Here you've written a SQL query, so that sort of indicates that you're thinking this is how you this is how you send a SQL query, which may or may not be what you intended. But that's the impression I get by seeing something that has a recognizable format of your query. Makes me think, aha, this is what you want to do.
I didn't write this slide, just to be clear.
Right, sorry. You
No,
in the general, toot them on.
The query could be anything. It could just be a name value pairs in the common query format that we see. I guess the interesting thing here is that it is kind of mirroring that lack of definition in the URI query string, because although everybody in the world seems to think that the query format in URIs and HTTP URIs is fixed to key equals value and key equals value and key equals value. That's not true. That's standardized by HTML and specific to HTML. It's just that it became really popular, and so it could be the same thing happens here. Maybe somebody will come up with a great query format. We don't know.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question. So Acme uses a concept, right? Post as get, right? Where we say, oh, we have to post because we have content, but it's really intended to be, more like a get. I wonder if would query want to be generalized to that, or is it really intended to be queries?
This is if we had a better name that was more generic, I think we'd take it. We were concerned that search was too specific. The nice thing about query is that it mirrors the query string in a URI, and that's how often people are using this. They just don't want to put it in the query string. They want to put it in the body. And so that's kind of a hint that, hey, if you could put it in the query string and you want to put it in the body, this is the method you should use. We could also call this method get underscore with underscore body if we really wanted to. But that's not the direction we took in the current draft.
Okay.
I'm not familiar enough with Acme to answer the question specifically, but it sounds like they could use it.
All right. Yeah. I mean, if you were
Fat get, I like that.
in fact, yeah. If get with body makes, is not out of line, then I'll mention this to the Acme folks.
Sure.
Okay.
Oh, that is a good idea. Thank you, Eric. Can you possibly open an issue on the repo for that, Eric? That'd be really helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments, questions? Thank you, Mark, for bringing it to our attention.
No worries. I think I'm next too. Yes. Oh, thank you. I didn't have to make slides for this one. It's fantastic. Rich is great.
No, Daryl.
Daryl. Oh, okay. Sorry, Daryl. Daryl's great too. So this is a draft that I put together a very long time ago. And it was just, almost a thought experiment to say, well, the link header, I think it was around the time that we did the link header the first time in RFC 5988. And, it's like, well, we have links in headers, and we have this framework to put links in headers. Why, and then we had URI template come along, which was me and a few other folks, Roy and Dave and someone else. we put together the URI template format. And so this was just a thought experiment to say, well, you should probably be able to put URI templates into links as well, into headers, so that you can do interesting things. And especially since the web is supposed to be generative, that's a really nice property here, that you can convey the template for something, and then the client can generate new URIs based upon the information you give it. And so this was an attempt to do that. And I very purposefully didn't push it very hard. I wanted to see if people were interested before I, did anything with it. And I got a few sniffs of interest over the years, but recently it seems like I've seen a lot of people come across and say, oh, that's something I need, or say, can we have this, without realizing that this draft is already there. And so I guess the question is there enough interest to maybe push it across the line now? I think there are a couple of open issues in my repo about this. One of them being, people have asked what Veribase is for, and some people are confused, but others say, well, that could be useful. So we probably need to at least clarify something there. And there, I think the other big issue, if I remember correctly, is that it's a good question as to whether we should use structured headers for this, or structured fields rather than duplicating the somewhat wonky link syntax and increasing the amount of wonky headers in the world. But I guess the question right now is not, how to address those issues. The question is there interest in adopting this in the working group? Phil?
Yeah.
Thanks. From my point of view, yes. I think this fits very well with what we're doing with JS1 Digital Link. I worry, especially in this environment. God, this is like being in lots of standards bodies. We talk about the huge cultural differences and the fear that a lot of people have of looking an idiot in front of their peers. So, with great trepidation, right? In front of you all, I'm going to make myself look an idiot. One of the link relation types we use in our work says, yeah, don't ask me, ask him. Right? In other words, a general redirect that says, I know what you want, I understand what you want, but I'm not the person to ask, go and ask them. And the link relation type we have for that is called handled by. The query you're asking me is handled by them over there. So I want to use this template to say, it's handled by them over there using this template. Is that the kind of use case that you're going to cringe at me for, or am I okay with that?
I don't know enough about the specifics, but conceivably, yeah, you could, generate a URI over there to, and kind of pass some information along with it, so that, that you can possibly avoid a round trip, which is always nice.
Right. That's what I'm trying to do. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. No, that sounds quite reasonable.
Okay. Phew, that's a really. Thank you. But yes, certainly, this is something I think we would very, very likely want to make use of. Thank you. Yes.
Cool.
I think the example that always comes to mind for me for this is you're making a request for something that returns a long list of things, and you want to be able to have links, construct links for off each of those things. So rather than embedding basically duplicate links in every single item in the list, this template would give you a way of being able to generate links for any of the items in the list.
Yeah.
And that avoids that common argument where everybody says, oh, hypermedia, but think of the bytes over the wire.
Well, helps mitigate it. Who will think of the bytes? And
is it fair to describe Varbase as basically a way of creating a unique, globally unique identifier for parameters in URI templates?
Exactly. It's a way to create a namespace for them. I'm not sure that's the right solution to that, but it seemed like something that might be useful to do, because otherwise, how do I know what a widget ID is in this particular instance?
Chris?
I don't have a whole lot to add, but I think this work is useful. I think the problem is well scoped and worth doing. I support this particular approach.
Thank you. I guess the other merit of this is it's pretty straightforward. It's not like this is a big spec.
Any other comments? Mark, what is it are you at the point where you think it's ready for the group to consider adoption, or are you just bringing up something back from the work in progress file? What's your
I
view?
think you could do a call for adoption if you wanted to. I think I'm happy to noodle away on it, but I'd rather get people's feedback and make it part of an open conversation rather than me just continuing to noodle at it.
So we heard some positive feedback. We'll confirm this on the mailing list, but is there anyone who thinks this is not something the working group should adopt and work on? Speak up.
Martin raised the concern in the chat that var-based isn't straightforward.
I'd agree with that. I think there's some interesting design decisions to be made there. There's some subtlety in there.
Okay. All right. So sounds like there's work to do, which is what we'd want, and that the folks here are in favor. So we will, Braun, mark that it will be put for call for adoption in the minutes, and we'll confirm that on the list. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. So I figured I'd slip Eric's stuff in here. Are you ready to go, Eric? Because we can go on to the other slides and come back to you if you don't know. There you go.
Okay, yes, I am. And I think the safest way might be to just can we use the uploaded or the available slides instead of me doing screen sharing? Screen sharing didn't look too great.
I didn't see a PDF of your slides.
Oh, I sent one to Rich, but anyway, so in that case, I'll do screen sharing.
Okay, I missed it. I apologize.
Doesn't matter. It's just because the last time it was not perfect. Let's say that. Okay. I do see some warnings, basically.
Okay, you should have it granted.
Okay. I don't see my screen being shared. Or is it?
You have to go on the share screen on the upper left after you got permission.
Rich, you may have to stop sharing before he can start.
Oh yeah. Okay. There we go.
Oh, that sounds reasonable.
Yep. Thanks, Mike.
Okay. I think, yes, okay. Okay, good. Is it working? Hello?
See your screen.
You can see it.
Okay, good. Okay, so let's go back. I don't want to go through all of it. Basically, I just put all the kind of history and the overview on the slide. So link set is that slide that Herbert van der Sampel and myself, we've been working on for a while. The idea, pretty simply said, is to say the links that can be represented in a link header field in HTTP also should be able to be represented as a resource, as a standalone resource. And we've been working on that for a while. We define two media types. One of them uses the syntax of RFC 8288, which is the normal syntax everybody's used to for links in the HTTP context. And the other one, which took a little bit more creativity, so to speak, is a JSON-based representation, which is intended to represent the model of RFC 8288, but does so in JSON so that people used to processing JSON have an easier time processing those link sets. And again, I won't go through all of this. I think we've seen that in previous meetings. Very broadly speaking, it looks like this. This is a JSON example. So this is one of these link sets. In that case, it has two links in it, two anchors, link relationships of next, and this HTTP example.com relations bus, and then two link targets. And since we've working on that for a while already, there actually are implementations out there already. Probably the biggest one is GS1, the GS1 digital link spec. Phil Archer has been working with us on that. He's on this call as well. And they are using it already, which is why we're kind of a little bit itching to get it stable so that they can also refer to a stable spec. And it also is being used in the FAIR signposting profile specification for scholarly resources, which is around having links for scholarly resources, which sometimes can be a lot of links with references to papers or references from papers. And all of this then makes more sense if you don't have to cram all of these things into an HTTP header field. Since the last meeting, we have produced a number of new versions. So we're currently kind of working on 06, but 05 is the one that's currently being published, or that's currently published. We have addressed 26 issues. I think we have discussed all of them appropriately. At least we haven't had any complaints that people said we didn't address that. And we are at 0 open issues. So in our mind, we're actually looking pretty good. We had some discussions already on the list. We had very good input from Mark, had a lot of input for us. And we had some other reviewers. I think Daryl also gave us a couple of inputs. So we did get, I think, a good set of inputs from the community already, and we think we have addressed them. And then currently we have no open issues. We have added a couple of things. So we added support for profiles. We also added the ability to have new line characters in the syntax that use the HTTP header field syntax, because that makes things a little bit more readable, better formatted, if you have those as text files. We also worked a little bit on the extensibility model. That also were some issues around that, how that is. We also had to work a little bit on the Json Ld mapping, and we also did a little of editorial updates. And where we are now is, as I said, we have published version number 5 of this draft. So we have had many more versions because we also have kind of a history of transitioning between different versions. So overall, we had 17 versions of that draft in the meantime. So it has been around for quite a while. And that's about it. So the one thing that is still open, but that is not really, I would say, something that is specific to our specification. But with the Json Ld mapping, the problem is that if you map what Json Ld does, for those of you who don't know it so well, Json Ld defines a way how you take JSON representation and basically turn it into RDF. And we can do that. But the problem is that if you do this for this example, then if you have link relation types that are IETF registered link relation types, then these are just strings and they're not like, right? So the extension link relation types are these URIs, which is something that RDF can work with. But the registered link relation types are just strings. And that means that it is a problem to turn that into a proper RDF model, because RDF is relatively constrained in what it can deal with as identifiers, because identifiers always have to be URIs. And in that case, the identifier is not a URI, it's just a string. So that is the one kind of open issue. It's not technically an open issue for the GitHub repo, but that's the one issue that we still have with Json Ld. But as I said, there's nothing in my mind that you can easily do about that, because that's just kind of an incompatibility of how the mechanism works for links with these strings as registered values and with what Json Ld needs as identifiers, which are URIs, and these two things just don't fit together. But apart from that, we're done. I'll stop sharing my screen here. So yeah, that's the status on link set. So as I said, we are at 0 open issues. So we think and hope that this, at some point, we can really turn this into something where everybody says, okay, this is ready to become a specification.
Yeah, that's awesome to see that you're down to 0 issues, and I don't see any reason why it's
Quick, publish before it.
just lock it down. No, this is great to see. And I will let Rich guide me through the process of how we take next steps on that. I believe it needs to go on list. There's the last call, right?
Right. So I see Phil's commented that it's currently implemented by Sacrifice a Goat. No, Mark. We don't do that anymore. The IETF's new rules are we're vegans. Okay, so the process is, first of all, thanks, Eric and others, for your patience. Often the way things work, right, like probably most of life, IETF is deadline driven. So someone says, here's my new draft, and I think it's all done. And then people come out of the woodwork and they make a whole bunch of corrections or suggestions, issues that have to be dealt with. What will happen now, I'm assuming everyone is everyone here is in favor of the working group last call. Yeah, no, save the goat. It's okay. We will issue on the list a working group last call. We'll decide. It's typically 1 or 2 weeks. And then what happened? That's sort of a last minute chance for people to say, "Oh, this issue. I just thought of this issue now." Okay, Sean, we'll do 2 weeks. So we'll do a 2-week last call. Yeah, especially because it's getting into the U.S. Thanksgiving holidays. So we do a working group last call. This is the last chance for the working group, quote unquote, last chance for the working group to make substantive changes. And then what will happen is we will have a document shepherd picked. I'll explain that in a sec. I guess it makes sense with the goats. And our responsible area director will take a look at the document, and they will give their feedback. It's Francesca, who is in the chat. Francesca Palomba, I'm saying her last name wrong. The shepherd writes up, in essence, a history of how it's been, the discussion. Thank you, Francesca Palombini. Okay, sorry. Writes up a history. There is a format to follow. What is the intended use of this? It's a proposed standard. The discussions, there weren't any notably difficult discussions. The working group is in favor of this. It's already being implemented. As I said, there's a format of it. And then after Francesca has approved it, it will get put on the IESG agenda. It will also go to the IETF last call, where the whole IETF gets a chance to look at it. Assuming all of those pass, or pass without substantive comments, then it gets put on the queue for publication. Publication is currently running a couple of months. Then the most important thing is you get to what's called auth 48, which is 48 hours, 48 days, 48 weeks, depending, where the RFC editor looks at it and they make editorial, nitpicky suggestions. Hey, you said was, and you should say where, or things like that. It's really English language wordsmithing. And then it gets published. But the point is, once it leaves, once the IESG approves it and the last IETF last call has happened, then the document is basically done, and you can say this is now in the queue to be published as an RFC. That last process takes, given the holiday year-end season, the IESG might be a little slower than usual, and the publication system they're back up to their normal speed now, having gotten over the XML v3 conversion hump. So it should be fairly straightforward. Any questions about the process? What I will do is I will probably write this up as this. I'll probably do the Shepherd write-up. It gets attached to the data tracker so people can see what's involved, and consider doing it for other documents as they come through our system. It's very common that the chairs are the ones who do the write-up because they have to summarize what's happened in the working group and how they feel. All right. We will issue this as a last call. Thanks for the offer, Eric. I will probably post a draft of the Shepherd write-up to the working group after the last call has passed. So there's two
last question.
decisions to take.
Just a very brief question. So we did start version 6, which has, I think, really super minor editorial changes. But should I then publish that one so that we have kind of the latest and greatest version out before you do the write-up?
Sure, why don't you?
Okay.
Yes, do that, and then we'll when you publish that one, then we'll say this is the one we're going for last call. It just has editorial changes.
Okay, will do. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, great. That's we're first with the slides and first into last call.
I figured we'd start on a positive note.
Yeah.
Thanks for that explanation, Rich. Okay, so if we want to slide to the next slide, what I did is I took each of the documents that are currently going through the working group and went to the GitHub issues and found what appeared to be the most contentious issues so that we could just surface them here and get any other conversation and encourage folks to go to those GitHub issues if they have strong opinions. Looking at RFC 7807 biz, the two main issues that seem to be attracting the most attention was this conversation around how to integrate warnings. And there seems to be two distinct threads of conversation. One which is around, well, how do I describe use the HTTP problem to describe what is actually a warning, and the other being, well, yeah, I want to do a regular request that comes back with a response, but also attach a warning. And I believe the latter suggestion, or the latter issue, we are punting to either a future spec or a separate spec, but I will let Mark speak to that as he jumped into the queue.
Yeah, I just closed this one because the conversation seemed to conclude that would be okay. If we need to reopen it, that's fine. That seems like the state we were in. So. Yep,
that's how I read it.
Yep.
The second issue is the multiple problems. And I believe Sanjay has created a PR based on a suggestion that was made in the thread that says it's a certain type of error that has the potential for multiple reasons why it occurred within a single request. And that uses the extension capabilities of HTTP problem to list out a set of causes. This wouldn't, if I understand correctly, this isn't actually, won't need to actually be part of the spec itself. It's just using the natural extension mechanisms of the spec. Is that correct? Mark?
So I think the place we ended up here was that we decided to document some more examples in the spec, at least one, if not more than one, to kind of illustrate how this could be done and what the parameters are around it. So I think, it in some ways it's very similar to the stuff we did for the most recent draft. We clarified and kind of explained and gave examples of stuff that was already there. It just wasn't adequately communicated in 7807. And so I think that's the direction we're going to go in. I know that Sanjay has a pull request that he's been working on that I think is getting closer to being ready to merge. So I think we just need to continue discussing that. It's a little delicate because if you make the examples too realistic, then people might just use those as templates almost, and cut and paste from the spec, which may or may not be a good thing. So we don't want to invent new mechanisms necessarily there that are just for the purpose of an example. So I think we just need to keep on working on that, and I think we'll get to a pretty good place. I see Sanjay's here. I don't know if he wants to say anything.
Eric is in queue. Eric, you want to go first?
Okay, yeah, thanks. Yeah, so I basically just wanted to kind of support what Mark said, right? So right now, I think the state is that we have this example and it looks like an actual mechanism, but it's not quite clear whether it's just an example or an actual mechanism. And I think in my mind, we have to go either one way or the other, but somewhere in the middle it's not great, right? Because then people, like Mark said, they might think this is an actual thing, but it isn't. And then we end up with this kind of, everybody uses that however they think it works. I think that would be the worst case scenario for us.
And just to be clear, I cut and paste this example from Sanjay's PR, and my understanding was this was purely an example of how you might use it. Causes is not an official part of the spec. But Sanjay, you want to take that?
Yeah, so thanks. It is an example, and I can, based on the comments, I can put some more words cautioning that it is an example for an extension. It doesn't look like the spec is saying that, but as Mark was saying, we had to give an example. That's what we agreed on. So we can do a couple of things. So one is the example for the multiple problems, and I think where more comments are is second example, which is using JSON pointer point to a problem in the request itself. I think that needs a bit more review, it appears. So looking forward to those comments.
Thanks, Sanjay. Mark?
Here, I think one of the things that came up in the discussion was the difference, there are different kinds of classes of multiple problems. And one is that you might have, multiple instances of the same problem type. Excuse me. And in that case, it's probably the type that's here in this example, the multiple errors, is not ideal. What you would really want to do is that have the validation error type allow multiple instances to be communicated of where it is in the document. So it's not so generic at the top level type. Another example would be what you see here, which is there are multiple different problem types in the document, and you need to convey them all at the same time. You don't want to just convey the first one, then have the person make the request and convey the second one, and so forth. And in that case, you do need this multiple errors type. But there's two different kinds of two different ways this can happen. One is where all the different problem types, although they are different problem types, they have the same recommended HTTP status code. For example, maybe it's a 400, which is quite common. Something's wrong with the request, and here are the details of that. And in that case, you should use that status code. The only time that you should use 207 multi-status is when there are multiple problem types. True, you have this multiple errors case that we're coming up with, and they have incompatible recommended HTTP status codes, and so you need some way to convey that. One example would be to use 207 multi-status, but I would say that even if they're all 400 4XX status codes, for example, you'd probably send it as 400 because that's the most generic 4XX status code. And so I think we need to have some more nuanced guidance here about these multiple status cases. And I'm really happy to write text about that. I just wanted to while we have the opportunity to do this quote unquote face-to-face, or at least as face-to-face as we can be in 2021, that it'd be good to kind of talk through those different cases, if that makes sense to folks.
Sanjay?
I think I was, when I wrote this, I was wondering how many examples at that early section that we should write. So I kind of tried to combine these two, but I agree with Mark that we can have separate examples. This was on the top in the earlier draft. So I thought maybe introduce these things right there, but we can introduce them in proper sequence. Like you just have one type of error, give example of that. And if you have cases like different kinds of errors, then in 207 could be used, and that would be a separate example. So Mark, yeah, feel free to have an update on that.
No, that sounds good, and I'm totally with you. I'm not a fan at all of specs that are just big walls of examples that you have to fight your way through. So if we can find a way to balance that to convey the nuance here without, having too many examples, I think that'd be a good goal to have here.
Excellent. Well, I could only fit so many examples on the slide, and this particular example looked like it would provoke conversation. So I'm glad it did. Are there any other items on 7807biz that you believe would benefit from further participation, Mark, that you want to call attention to?
I think the multiple, since before we started this, the multiple problems was clearly the most impactful potential change. The Json LD context, I think we probably need a proposal for that. I think Ashbourne volunteered to do that, if I remember correctly. Yep. The 32, the extension to show source of problem in a request for 4XX class of errors. I think that's just kind of a part of the example, processing and getting that right. So we'll get there. I think the other question that's kind of been in the back of our heads is, do we want to standardize any so the last revision, we introduced the idea of a registered problem type. Still URI, but it's in a registry to kind of promote good practice and so forth. And I guess the question is, do we want to go to the effort to define any of those, like the multiple errors or a validation error problem? And I think that's something we could do. I do think that's not a trivial design task. It would take some time, but it's so there's, I guess, the decision: do we want to try and put any in this document, or do we want to punt that to maybe a follow-up document? And I don't have strong feelings. It's something we should do with purpose. Either way.
Excellent. Well, if there's no other comments on this draft, we could move on to the next one. which I may have to wave my hands a little at because Roberto, I don't believe, is in the call. The rate limit headers, Roberto did publish a new update to this document just a few days ago. The items that seem to be the most popular are this conversation around naming of the headers. At the moment, there is rate limit dash limit, rate limit dash remaining, a rate limit dash reset. I know Mark has suggested that maybe shortening those to RL dash. There is a interesting conversation about compatibility with existing deployments, because this spec is, as much as anything, is an attempt to standardize what is current practice. But the current practice starts with X dash, so it's going to break compatibility anyway, which then opens the door of, well, why not rename the fields as well? So if you have opinions on that particular topic, there is an issue open there. Throttling scope is an interesting conversation that there was a discussion, I believe, in the HTTP working group around whether retry after should have any scope qualifications, and it was that did not lead to anything other than clarification around retry after, I believe. Here, because there is a lot of flexibility around determining quota policies, there is an opportunity to define scope. And I believe what's meant by that is are you being throttled for just this particular resource? Are you being throttled for all of these resources for your company? Are you being throttled for just this particular mailbox or this particular website? So I believe the extensibility mechanism is going to be able to address this with quota policies, but there's definitely a conversation worth having there. Mark?
Just on that, in my experience, scoping the applicability of a header is one of the worst things to leave out. Well, no, that's not true. Sometimes it makes sense to leave it out. But if it's left out and it's ambiguous, it can be really pernicious to figure out down the road. And we, for retry after, we didn't define it because it's already in deployment and it's undefined, so we can't just define it by fiat and break some people, in their idea of how it applies. So if to me, the intuitive thing to do here would be to not define a static scope, but to say that the scope is undefined, but also to define maybe a vocabulary of scopes that people can apply and say, well, this is scope just to this resource, or this is scope to this entire site, or, carve out the right kinds of primitives that people can use to declare this if they want to declare it.
Yep, and that seems to be the direction that is being headed to in that particular thread. The define header dependencies is an issue that talks about, do you need to provide all three, rate limit, rate remaining, rate reset? Are there interdependencies? Can you define one but not another? And that conversation is ongoing. The last item is related in two ways. It is an extension to the standardized behavior and refers to the use of a structured field header list as opposed to it's currently using a list because you can apply multiple quotas. You can say in the next 10 minutes, you can make 100 requests. In the next hour, you can make 10,000 requests. So you can define multiple. But that is, again, not compatible with the existing implementations, and so there's questions around compatibility with the past. So if you have thoughts but don't want to bring them up here, please go to GitHub and add your thoughts there. And if there are no other comments, we can move on to the next. Oh, wait. Are you back in the queue, Mark, or still in the queue from previously? Oh, he's gone. Deprecation header. Eric, do you want to speak to these? Or do you want me to?
Sure, yeah, I can. Thanks, Daryl. Yeah, so this one, we have not produced a new version since the last meeting. We have a couple of open issues still. So we have not been, I would say, super good at closing all of these. As I said, there's no new version of the draft. Mostly, I think I would like to encourage everybody to look at the draft. If you're not aware of it, it's a very simple one. It's very similar to the sunset mechanism that already is an RFC, where deprecation is a header field where you can say this resource still works, but it's deprecated, so you should think about alternatives. It may get shut down, all these kind of things. It's a very simple mechanism. It can either say this is deprecated or this is going to be deprecated with a date in the future. One of the, I think, most contentious issues we had around this was this question of scope. So is deprecation always just for the resource, where you say this whole resource will become deprecated, or is there some kind of more fine-grained model? I think we still might have some issues around that. I'm not quite sure, to be honest. I know that Daryl has his own opinions about that.
Taking off my chair hat, I think you've made a good case for that there's value to just keeping it focused at the resource level. I'll have to go back to our team and say, hey, that header that I suggested you using, you're not using it for the right way, and find some other way of doing it. But I think we're getting close to being able to close that one.
Good,
with no action.
Okay, that's good to hear. So the point being there, I think that if you think about partial deprecation, or you want to point to particular things that are deprecated or are going to be deprecated, you kind of need to have a model how to do that, or it doesn't make a lot of sense to do it. And then that goes pretty quickly very deep into the realm of the representation that you're sending, because you somehow need to talk about that. And since this is an HTTP header field, we're not really kind of intending to go to that level. Okay, so
Martin has a question in the chat. To answer your question, why it says retry after has an ambiguous scope, why this not also? This scope is not scope as in how many resources does this apply to. The desire was to be able to have the deprecation header say, there is something inside this response, this representation, that has been deprecated. The entire resource isn't going away, but one of the data elements within it is being deprecated. So it's wanting a much more fine-grained than a resource.
Okay, it seems like the comments are mostly about retry after, so good. We don't have to worry about that. Yeah, so that one. Then the question was, yeah, can you redirect to a new location?
There was just a conversation as to whether or not this was a valid example, and I think the issue was tending towards, yes, this is a valid example.
Yeah. And then so that number 12 that I think that one was raised by Mark, if I recall correctly.
Yep.
Saying that it's just not such a great design to do it like that. And to be honest, I haven't thought. So I think my main point was that I agree that it maybe is not a great design, but that's how Sunset works. So it's a design out there in the wild, and we could either mirror that design, which at least was the starting point for that, or we could say, okay, there's a better way to do that, but then it works differently.
Mark?
This one.
Just waiting to. There it is. Yeah, if I remember correctly, in the semantics revision, we documented that as a bad practice. At least if Julian got his way, we did. So it causes ambiguities. It causes parsing difficulties, and just yeah.
Yeah, I mentioned in the chat that because Sanjay called out, well, this is OpenAPI uses deprecated as a Boolean, and I think Mark was suggesting why not just use just a date, and if the date is in the past, then consider it true. And I wish we'd done that in OpenAPI. So please don't use OpenAPI as a model to follow for this particular thing.
Yeah, no, right now we're using Sunset, right, which does that. So, and I haven't heard any specific complaints about that, but I agree that it's probably not the best design, and we have a chance to make it easier to work with. So, yeah. So I think it's a good suggestion, but we still have to address that.
Sanjay,
I was just thinking that the API developers were writing the contracts, not to confuse them too much. If there is some between the OpenAPI spec, or even we have been discussing with async API also, and the HTTP header. But I agree. I'm not saying that we follow that. If I was just thinking from people who write the specs, we don't want to confuse them too much.
Yeah, it's just when you map it to programming languages, having properties that can be two different types just makes devs have to jump through hoops. Because not everybody's using JavaScript. Cool. If there are no other comments about deprecation header, you know where to find the issues.
Yes, so if anybody has any additional input or comments or whatever, please, of course, feel free to raise an issue, ideally, or comment on the existing ones. We still have to go through the ones that are open. I think there's a total of 6 open issues in there right now, so it's not huge. It's also not a huge spec, but we definitely still have to do some work on it.
Excellent. Okay. Item potency key. So I think Mark just went through all of the drafts and just added an issue use structured fields. And I think it's a great suggestion. And as I mentioned in the chat before, that should be the de facto suggestion with specs moving forward. Use structured keys unless there's a really good reason not to. Structured fields, structured headers. The other issue that came up right at IETF111 was the fact that there is this existing specification from Oasis called Repeatable Requests for doing a similar thing. However, from my reading of it, the repeatable request is somewhat more ambitious and puts significant additional burden on the server side. So it is an interesting question as to whether or not it makes sense to have these two things, two different specs, live side by side depending on what requirements are. Sanjay, you want to speak to that?
Curious, I'm seeing, first of all, I want to apologize. There are no drafts since last meeting bad on us. But we definitely would produce one before the next one. I am looking at the issues, and there was one, I think, Eric, you have sent an email to audit a comments list. Did you receive anything? Do you have any updates for us on that? I wasn't sure. That's one issue that just came up right after we released the draft, and we haven't made any progress on that also.
Yes, if I may jump in here. So yeah, I did receive some. So the issue with the Oasis repeatable requests spec is that it kind of has a bigger scope. It's not just the idempotency key. They also have these correlation keys so that you can correlate requests more easily. And some specs do, or some of the practices out there do both. Some of them do only idempotency keys. So in terms of the practice, I think that's out there, the Oasis repeatable requests method has more applicability, or is something that can cover more possible scenarios, what people are doing. But that would also mean that if we did wanted to align those, or say there is a mechanism for doing that, then that would also mean that we need some kind of correlation identifier, correlation key, and we don't have that right now. So yes, I heard back from them, and basically what we ended up with is saying, yes, there's overlap, but there is also a difference in scope.
So one question I have is if the repeatable request does some more advanced things, what is the better place in the world to end up with? A repeatable request spec that says, hey, if you want to do something more sophisticated, go do it that way? Or an IETF spec that, like the idempotency key, which allows you to do it as a simple way, but also adds in additional semantics to allow you to also do the things that repeatable requests effectively keep creating a competing spec for those with the repeatable requests?
That's a good question, and I don't have a good answer to that.
Sanjay?
So before writing this up, I did a bit of digging, and I found so many instances where what we have discussed. So the draft comes after a lot of implementation, it seems, right? It's not like, I think the application is a bit different, where we don't have as many. When we started writing it, we didn't have as many implementations out there. Now they have increased a lot. But in this case, it was already used by so many API developers. So it was more about standardizing. And honestly, I didn't come across Oasis's draft then or usage. So I don't know. Eric has been looking at a lot of APIs also. He might have seen it, but I had not seen it. So I was just wondering, we can refer this, but this deserves its own place, since there are lots of implementations already using it without it being a draft.
Yeah, I suppose there's no harm whatsoever in creating an initial version of the idempotency key that just serves the basic requirements and limit the scope. And if there's demand for more sophisticated scenarios, then address that at a later concern. I suspect the reason why the Oasis repeatable requests can't have more independence in implementation dependencies is because it's largely targeted at people who are building OData APIs with OData machinery for implementation. Hence, they can make some implementation assumptions. So probably a safer bet to keep it closely scoped to the current implementation requirements of people who are using idempotency key. At least that will get us to the finish line quicker. So the only other item that was listed in the idempotency key repo that had activity on was a request to add an appendix about how this relates to conditional requests. There seemed to be support of that, and I didn't see any objections other than the fact it will take more time. Awesome. Cool. So that brings us to the end of the notes on the documents. The only thing that I want to just call folks' attention to is Mark created a repo to have GitHub Discussions and has filled it with, we could do this, we could do that. He has no shortage of suggestions for work that could be done. One of the specs that was raised that might be interesting for this working group is this health check API. And so if you have scenarios in your working environment where having a standardized response to health check would be useful, I encourage you to take a look at that spec and go take a look at the discussions. And I, with my very newbie chair hat on, I'm a little reluctant to suggest, hey, let's just take on another one. And I'm very happy to see Linkset head into last call so that we can shepherd some documents out and make room for new ones. But would definitely love feedback on whether you think that this health check API is worth adoption. Mark.
So to be clear, I created that repo, so hopefully other people will put their ideas in there too. But yeah, I do have a few. And from my perspective, I'm looking, if things get upvoted a lot, or if there's a lot of discussion about something, that to me is an indication that I'll put more energy into it. There are a lot of different things I could write, but if people aren't interested, I'm not going to put the energy into them. So if folks want to upvote what they're interested in, that would be really helpful. Or downvote, or say this is a bad idea. That's helpful too, and of course put their own ideas in there. Yeah.
Sanjay?
Yeah, so this one, I came across this while looking at Spring Boot's inbuilt implementation on health check. And I think I have asked this question to the author because he has referred that he has looked at different, I think, Azure Health and Spring Boot and all, and try to accommodate those things. But what I couldn't find was Spring Boot is used a lot in enterprises, right? And have they adopted it or not? And if they have adopted this, then it's a very strong case. But this is a very general problem, and to have that defined in a standard form would help a lot. So I think it's very relevant, but I had some questions about where it is adopted, because there are lots of implementations, and if this is different than those popular implementations, then adoption may take some it may not be as good. So I thought that maybe we can ask the question, invite the author, and find that out. And yeah, I really like that discussion group. Thanks, Mark.
Eric?
Yeah, and so in terms of adoption, right? I think like with some of the things that we're doing in this group, it's always the same. We look out there and we see that there are 20 different ways how people do stuff, and then we come up like the good old XKCD, right? We come up with the 21st way, and we hope that it is more convincing than the 20 ways. But it always is going to be something where it takes some time until some specific approach of doing that gains momentum. But I think for the health check part, we do see that is a pattern that you see in a lot of APIs. So the pattern is definitely something that is pretty popular. So I think it definitely is something that could have quite a bit of impact. And just having one other building block that you don't have to come up with by yourself, but you can just say, okay, health check APIs. If we have an health check endpoint in our API, this is how we're going to do it, period.
I think one thing that's appealing to me is it's another example of a media type like HTTP problem that addresses a horizontal need across HTTP APIs and demonstrates the value of putting a chunk of semantics to solve a particular problem in a media type, which is not a concept that many API designers are familiar with. They largely see media types as, well, that's application/JSON, right? And we just put all of our semantics inside application/JSON. So I'm definitely enthusiastic for supporting these kind of semantically rich media types. Bron. You
do anything other than go to the chat tab.
Say that again, Bron. I didn't catch the beginning. I'm confused. Okay, move on. Okay, operator error. Perfect.
Sorry, let's see the next step on this. I think we have. Do we have to invite the author to? So what I think that probably needs to be conveyed on that discussion.
It's a good call, Eric.
Yeah, so I've spoken with Irakli, and he's kind of interested, but is also something that I think he hasn't looked at for a little while. So if we're interested to maybe add this to our list, I'm sure we can get him to join as a guest or something like that. So yeah, he's not focusing on that anymore, so it's kind of just sitting there. But I think it is something that is useful and could be a very useful thing for the group to produce.
And to answer your question, Sanjay, I think I need to talk to folks, because I have Rich nodding when I say we shouldn't take any more things on, and I have Mark in the chat saying, "Oh, you can take on lots of more things." So we will get consensus on our capacity, and then we'll go chase Irakli.
Agreed. We need to. I mean, it's not totally our decision. You know, if the working group buckles down and finishes off the existing drafts quickly, and certainly Eric and Sanjay and others have been trying, that's great. But we don't want to overload people and have a bunch of things in draft that don't progress. But it's up to the group.
Yeah,
Martin,
and
show you can finish something before you take more work on, and that will certainly.
And because when we charted the group, one of our statements was, you know, we didn't quite know how to run this working group, and because it had such a broad scope, and we were like, well, let's try it for 6 months and see how it goes. And we are somewhat further along than 6 months, and we need to, as Martin says, show we can finish something. So if there is any other business for many folks, it looks like we can end early. Oh, Per, go ahead.
So I have a question about the query method. If it would also, I can't find the draft anywhere, or maybe I misunderstood, but I wonder if there will also be a corresponding head method. So where you have a query and the payload, but you get only the headers back and no payload. Did you understand my question?
Yeah, I'm thinking though it's probably hard for head to do something because you didn't send the body, but I'll let Mark speak to that.
Working microphone working, yay. Yeah, it's so to be clear, this is a draft in the HTTP working group, and we've pasted the link into the chat a few times now. It's not called draft anything query because we haven't locked down the method name, so it's safe method with body, and it's in the HTTP working group. Like Daryl, I think Daryl's on the right path there. I think if it, well, you'd send the whole query, but you don't get the response back. That seems weird, and honestly, you know,
I see it as a dry run. Basically, you could have it work as a dry run then to know if your query would get accepted or not. But maybe it's just.
Yeah. I see your point. I do wonder if maybe that could be triggered with a header on the request, for example. I just know that, head adds a lot of weird corner cases to HTTP, and I'm not 100% sure that if we were designing HTTP from scratch today, we would still do head, acknowledging that it's useful, but it's having two methods that are supposed to have the same semantics and supposed to operate in the same way, except that one doesn't return a body, creates some weird corner cases. So if you have a requirement for that, please open an issue on the repo. It's certainly an interesting discussion to have.
Okay, I'll do it. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks.
So I'll mention the charter. There's some discussion going on in the chat. The charter for this working group is different from how most working groups are chartered. They're given specific tasks, and and advisory deadlines, milestones as to when we would meet them. This group, thanks to Mark, was deliberately left open, and so there's very few specifics in it, and it's like, well, let's see what the group needs to do. It's supposed to have been revised a while ago. Francesca says, yeah, that's on her to do. But we are unusual from other groups in that we don't have specific things to do. And Mark, you can speak next, since I assume you want to talk to that.
Kind of put a poison pill in this charter because, at least for me personally, my goal for this was to make sure that we created a group that was connected to the HTTP API community and connected to real world implementation and deployment. And if it was just a bunch of IETF folks sitting around a campfire chatting about what they thought about HTTP APIs, I was not interested in perpetuating any such thing. I think we've done that to some degree. We have some participation from the HTTP API community. And what I'm going to we have taken a little longer than we originally thought to get something out the door. But what I would plead with our area director, who I see is up next, is that if I strongly suspect that if we get a couple of, as they say, runs on the board, if we get a couple of specs shipped that actually add value to the HTTP API community, I think that will feed more energy into the group and get us some new people who are more connected to the HTTP API world involved. Not that we don't have people now, it's just I want more of them. And so I think it would be great to see us ship a few specs and see what happens next. But I do feel like we have a fairly successful and I've been happy with the nature of the meetings. I've been wondering a little bit if maybe we should hold interim meetings once in a while. It's something maybe the chair should discuss or talk to the community about. But yeah, I'm pretty happy with where we're at now.
Hi. Yeah, I just wanted to repeat what I was saying in the chat, which is there is this requirement in the chat, which is to assess whether the group is functioning well. And it explicitly mentions not only me, but the ASG. So I think that there is an IP for me to bring this in front of the ASG and have some sort of discussion. I don't know if it needs to be like a telechat or an informal telechat, but I will make sure that this happens just so that we are complying with the charter text. I personally think that the working group is functioning well, even though that's very subjective. So it's kind of hard to say, is it functioning well if we don't have a like very precise details of what that means, or yeah. But yeah, this doesn't mean the working group is on probation. This is just, I guess, another another moment to be able to discuss how things are working for everybody, I guess, for the community as well. And it is working well if we ship good stuff. Yes, I guess that's the main thing, but it also takes a little bit of time to do that. So no documents yet doesn't mean necessarily that it's not working well. And I agree with Mark about possibly having interims. That would be nice. And coordinating with HTTP, which I know you're already doing, but yeah, they have interims to replace IETF meetings, like week meetings. So okay, and I don't know if we want to like start a discussion in the mailing list about so that I can bring that to the ASG, if that would be useful at all, or it's just maybe not that useful. Chairs, do you have an opinion? And Mark and everybody else?
Sorry, I don't know if it was just me, but Francesca, you cut out there for part of that.
Okay, I don't know which part. So the last thing I was saying is that I don't know if it would be interesting to have start the mailing list thread, just to get feedback from the community that I can then bring to the ISG to have that discussion about is it functioning well. Or maybe that's not useful, and I just have that informal discussion with the ISG.
You're muted, Rich. You're muted, Rich.
My view is, if the ISG in the discussion has concerns, then we can probably have some discussion. But I don't know that we need to. I think the idea of having interims in particular co-located virtually where other API working groups are involved, W3C and or what working group or whoever it is, Open Graph, that would be a really useful thing, interesting thing to try doing. So we can talk amongst ourselves or not on the list as to where, instead of saying what's a venue we should go to, what's a place that we should schedule our video interim nearby to help encourage other people. So we can certainly do that.
That sounds good to me. Yeah, since I don't hear anyone bringing concerns, I think I can just have this informal chat with the ISG, and then we have done our job from what the charter said. Thank you.
Sounds good.
Okay. Are we adjourned to the mailing list?
I believe we are.
Thank you, everyone, for the participation and the continued good work. Stay safe, stay healthy. See you soon.
See you on the list and in GitHub. Bye, folks.